When it comes to weapons in D&D, not all of them were created equal, and many are considered to be mechanically subpar. On top of this, the rulebooks don't provide us much detail on these weapons, leaving us to fill in the gaps of how our weapons look and feel. Due to this lack of information, I'd like to go through and examine all the weapons of D&D to answer, what is this weapon, both in history and in D&D, how is it different from the other weapons available, and does it need to be made better, and how can we do so? For today's video, let's look at what happens when your mace goes through its punk phase, and examine the Morningstar. The Morningstar, derived from the German Morgenstern, is a club-like weapon consisting of a shaft attached to a round head with one or more spikes coming off it. Historical analysis of the Morningstar can be riddled with doubt and debate, as sources discussing their size, construction, and use can disagree. Some records, for example, call a Morningstar a type of mace, whereas others describe it as a distinct weapon. Others consider the Morningstar to actually be in reference to the spiked metal ball on the end, meaning the flail is also a type of Morningstar, though most sources disagree with this assessment. With all this in mind, the Morningstar could reasonably be considered a type of mace, which are both simply a type of club. But for the purposes of this video, I'll be considering the Morningstar its own distinct weapon. Most sources define three types of Morningstar: a military version with a wooden haft and metal head, a peasant version made of wood and fitted with nails, and a decorative version made entirely of metal. Infantry Morningstars would generally be longer, two-handed variants that measure over 2 meters long, whereas cavalry Morningstars are described as shorter, anywhere from a half a meter to a meter long. Historical accounts seem to trace the Morningstar back to the ancient era, with an illustrated history of arms and armor stating, "The Morningstar was common among the ancients, for many museums possess several fragments of these weapons belonging to the Age of Bronze." While it's possible that spiked maces existed in the ancient era, the majority of historical evidence from the ancient and Romanesque period seem to indicate that traditional maces were more popular. As gambeson and mail armor evolved from the 12th century onward, they became better at distributing the force behind a blunt object, lessening the impact felt by the user. In addition, helmets and plate armors began to feature more curves in their design, making it difficult for hits from bludgeons to strike the target dead on. As a result, weapon systems had to adapt to the armor of the time, with things like flanges and spikes being added to traditional maces to be able to catch against enemy armor. With this innovation, the Morningstar rose to prominence in Germany in the early 14th century. Used by peasants and knights alike, the Morningstar was pretty handy against armor, with spikes concentrating the force of each blow on a smaller spot, much like the flanges on a mace would. It became so prominent that it caught the eye of Henry VIII, who ruled England from 1509 to 1547 when he wasn't busy executing his wives. You see, Henry VIII had a fascination with unique weapons, with this Morningstar, referred to as the Holy Water Sprinkler, believed to have been his around the early 16th century. Measuring 1.8 meters in total length, it takes on all the appearances of a traditional two-handed Morningstar, with one minor addition. It's also a gun. While not meant to be used in actual combat, it's still one of the more unique Morningstar variants that you can still see today at the Royal Armouries Museum in the Tower of London. Unfortunately, the effectiveness of bludgeoning weapons waned in comparison to the other prominent weapons of the time. While the Morningstar wasn't popular enough to become a primary weapon among major European forces of the Middle Ages, it remained a niche, fascinating weapon. Once firearms entered the fray, the Morningstar became relegated to a relic of the medieval era. There is one minor exception, though. In the trenches of World War I, the clashing of weapons old and new saw a unique club find a use once again. The trench club was a short, improvised club with nails or other sharp objects embedded into the end. These clubs were used alongside knives and entrenching tools in close quarters fighting, and had the added benefit of not making as much noise as a Lee Enfield. After the Great War, these spiked clubs continued the Morningstar's legacy in the fight against the undead. Whether it's 1514 or 2024, driving nails into the end of a Louisville slugger is still a great weapon for bashing in heads, and is exceptionally popular in zombie media, thanks in no small part to Negan's bat, Lucille, from The Walking Dead.
Back to it.
Outside of this modern interpretation, though, the Morningstar remains an iconic weapon of the Middle Ages, even if it wasn't the most popular one. In D&D, the Morningstar is described as a refined, spiked club. Their shafts are longer than a heavy mace, and their heads are set with around 20 spikes coming out of them. Present since 1st edition, the Morningstar of older editions would cost between 5 and 10 gold pieces, weighed between 2.7 and 5.6 kilograms, and dealt either 2d4 or 1d8 bludgeoning or piercing damage depending on the edition. In 5th edition, the Morningstar costs 15 gold pieces, weighs 1.8 kilograms, and deals 1d8 piercing damage. Much like when we covered the flail, that's really all the Morningstar has going for it. At face value, it has the same cost and damage as a longsword when held in one hand, but it weighs more and doesn't have any weapon properties that make it stand out. In fact, when we compare it to the War Pick, another 1d8 piercing weapon, the Morningstar's only difference is that it costs and weighs more. So even among weapons that do 1d8 piercing damage, the Morningstar is a lesser option. Now, if we really give it a fair shake, the Morningstar is pretty okay on its own. It does fair damage, it doesn't cost too much, and it has a reasonable weight to not make characters over-encumbered. When compared to other martial weapon options, though, there's no mechanical reason to choose the Morningstar specifically, which leads to it having no real identity or role in the game. So, at the moment, the Morningstar is kind of bland. It still works as an okay weapon, and the sheer novelty of it can make it appealing to some players. However, if a player wanted to use the Morningstar as their character's primary weapon, it's pretty obvious that they're choosing a weapon that's just not as good as some of the other options. So, rather than let the Morningstar wither away in the shadows, I want to see what unique features or properties we can add that make this weapon shine like the star it is in D&D. My first suggestion is to allow the Morningstar to swap between bludgeoning and piercing damage types. Back in 3rd edition, the Morningstar was a simple, one-handed melee weapon that dealt 1d8 damage, but it could swap between bludgeoning and piercing damage, which gave it a bit more distinction from the heavy mace. While damage type isn't as important in 5th edition as it was in older editions of the game, it still gives the Morningstar something unique to do, providing flexibility when approaching various types of enemies. The big downside to this is that many monsters in 5th edition don't come with a lot of resistances, vulnerabilities, and immunities, so Dungeon Masters would have to tweak existing monsters to make choosing between damage types actually matter in the game. My second suggestion on how to fix the Morningstar is to have the Morningstar apply a status debuff on hits. One of the biggest downsides of 5th edition's base weapons is that they don't allow non-magical characters to apply status effects to enemies, greatly limiting their control options. Now, at this point, it kinda feels like cheating to keep referencing the Weapon Masteries table from the 1D&D UA, since it's basically been confirmed that those are how the game is going to be once the 1D&D books release in September. but they do also have some good ideas in them, so I'm going to keep referencing them. In the 1D&D UA, the Morningstar has the Sap property, which states that if you hit a creature with the weapon, it has disadvantage on its next attack roll until the start of your next turn. With this weapon property, the Morningstar would become a really powerful defensive weapon for tank characters, giving them the ability to inflict disadvantage on a potentially powerful attack, so long as you can actually hit them. A well-placed strike inflicting disadvantage on a charging orc, for example, can make all the difference to a backline wizard who is about to get obliterated. My third and final suggestion on how to fix the Morningstar is to give it the versatile weapon property. Historically, infantry Morningstars were intended to be used with two hands, similar to a maul, but in D&D, there's no distinction that really allows the Morningstar to be used in this way. The longsword and the battle axe are versatile slashing weapons, and the warhammer is a versatile bludgeoning weapon, but there's currently no versatile piercing weapons. By allowing the Morningstar to be wielded in two hands to deal 1d10 piercing damage, it can have the same flexibility as a longsword or warhammer, while not overshadowing those weapons due to its different damage type. All in all, these are just a few of my own suggestions on how to make the Morningstar better in D&D. Without any of these suggestions, it kinda falls flat when compared to the other martial weapons. But if we add some features that give the Morningstar flexibility and damage potential, it can begin to find its place in the game of D&D. With that, we come to the end of today's video on the Morningstar. More than just a spiky mace, the Morningstar is a niche weapon that's captivated the imagination of historians and gamers alike. As it is now, it's fairly underwhelming, but with a few tweaks here and there, we can turn the Morningstar into a defensive control weapon that gives users more options on the battlefield. However, what I want to know is, what do you think of the Morningstar? Do you believe it should stay as it is now? Did you like some of the suggestions I put forward, or did you have your own ideas on how to fix the Morningstar in D&D? You can let me know down in the comments, or you can discuss it on the Alt-Roll Discord using the link in the description. If you want to support Alt-Roll, you can visit our Ko-fi link to leave a one-time or recurring donation. And make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to be notified when our videos go live. However, that's all I had for you. Thank you all for watching, make sure to have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all of you next time.